Today, we are touching on card cleaning once again. The topic of this Victor Wembanyama Black Prism 1 of 1 can't go away. We've spoken about it. This will be the third time in the last week, the second time relating to card cleaning, because PSA have come out with a statement. Their president has essentially come out and given a statement that I think a lot of people are misinterpreting or trying to misrepresent. We're going to talk through exactly what he said and then also talk through my thoughts on the whole situation and what this means for individuals that use cleaning services and overall what we should be saying towards PSA about, their lack or ability, I should say, to do the due diligence that we're paying them for. So there's a lot, to unpack here. So just bear with me as we do cover it and let me know, as always, your thoughts down below if I missed anything. Now, by now you would have seen this statement, right? This is from Ryan Hodge, or Hodge, I believe is how you pronounce his surname. Maybe I butchered it. But essentially he came out, he is the president of PSA, I should say that first. He came out and said exactly this. Lots of conversations about this card in recent days. I got to hold it and its cousin while they were both in-house. PSA stands by the original assessment, and our graders did not detect anything with the service to deem it was altered. That said, I want to clarify, PSA does not approve of any chemicals or foreign substances being added to the surface of a card to improve the condition or appearance being a key word. If we detect that this has happened to any card, we will consider it altered. Now, the reason why this is important is because this Black Prism 1 of 1 on the left, we spoke about 2 days ago, because this card was graded by PSA, clearly got a 10, as we did discuss. But what was interesting is that whilst individuals were collecting this card from PSA headquarters, they came out and gave a shout out to Kurt's Card Care. If you're not sure what Kurt's Card Care is, it's essentially a guy that sells this kit. His name is Kurt. And this kit basically, has tools in it to help you clean your cards. It has a polish in there. It has a water solution to wipe down your cards. I believe it comes with a microfiber cloth. It has a tool to help, roll down edges and all that sort of stuff. And, that pack and that tool was something that we've discussed many times on this channel. It's something that, I consider to be a bit of a hanky-panky, considering these graders consider that stuff to be altered. And as you can see there by the PSA president's statement, they do in fact still consider it to be altered. If you're adding polish to a card to improve the appearance of it, you're altering the card in that sense. That's PSA's words. So to everyone in my recent videos, or essentially every video that I've talked about this on, when they say PSA, don't consider this altered, get over it. Well, there's word from the horse's mouth directly, right? Their president has come out and said it is in fact altered and you're altering the card. So this raises a few questions, right? Number one, the most glaring is why PSA can't, identify this sort of stuff. We've heard in the past, I believe Pete from SGC talk about the fact that they can see polish on cards sometimes, but it is a hard thing to notice. But it's just one of those things where, do we expect more of PSA in this instance? If somebody's using a polish on a card, in order to fill out scratches or be somewhat abrasive to remove some of these scratches, as some of these cleaning products do in fact do, if they can't notice that, then why are we paying them? Should we be expecting more of them in this particular instance? I can understand them missing it, right? Because if it's not on the card when they grade it, how can they spot it, right? Or if the solution is maybe soaked into the card, how can they notice it? But at the same time, that's perfectly fair, that they can't notice it because it's not there to be spotted. But my mindset is, well, if people now have that understanding, right, and you've basically got their president coming out and saying, well, we didn't notice anything wrong with this card, despite the owner saying that they used Kurt's Card Care while they were in our office, that should concern you and that should wake you up a little bit as to why you're paying such premiums for these cards. Like that, it's absurd. You've got a grader coming out and saying, well, if we spot it, we will, do something about it, but they can't spot it. So some of you will say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is it's still against their T's and C's. And I am still concerned about the long-term impacts that these chemicals and these other, tools and solutions, like soaking cards as an example, have on a card long-term. My biggest concern has always been, you can do whatever you want to your card. And people think I've attacked, Kurt in the past and all that kind of thing. Kurt is somewhat transparent in that he teaches people how to do this sort of stuff, right? He has videos on his Instagram and he'll teach you how to do it. So it's not like he's doing it behind closed doors, but he will hide serial numbers when he's showing off the results, right? My mindset has always been, well, why are you doing that? Why are you hiding the serial number? Like, are you concerned that it's going to get decertified? Well, obviously that's why you're hiding it. So if you are sharing that concern, why do you think that concern exists? Because the graders have concerns about what you've done to the card long term might impact on their grade, right? That card they've graded as a 10 might now, in 2 years' time, be an 8 because maybe humidity does something to the card. Maybe the fact that you soaked it in water over time, it damages the card. Because again, like we talked to a few months ago, there are plenty of blowout threads that talk about that fact, right? That people have soaked cards and then over time they've split and cracked. There's all these things, right, that I think are very important. So when people are sort of saying, well, people are just haters when they're going after Kurt, that's not the case at all. I'm asking serious questions over here. You want to sit back and say, well, what's the big deal? Clearly it's perfectly fine because they're grading it. It's like, well, what is the long-term impact? What about the poor person that buys a card for their PC that they end up owning it and something happens to it while it's in the slab? And if that happens with a PSA card, obviously you're protected by their guarantee, but SGC has a pretty poorly worded guarantee. BGS do not have one at all. So you're basically shit out of luck in that instance. And like I've said many times, right, people will say, well, Daniel, how do you know that this polish damages the card? How do you know that the edge rolling or the soaking might revert over time and might damage the card over time, in particular the soaking? My message has always been, well, why is it on me to prove that? Shouldn't it be the person doing it in the first place justifying why this stuff does not damage the card long term? Shouldn't it be on them as opposed to me asking the question? And I think my point, still stands on that. I'm all for people, like I've said many times, do whatever the heck you want to these cards. Just disclose it to me before you sell it. Like I said, these guys with the, Victor Wembanyama 1 of 1, the NorCal sports cards, they disclose it by opening their mouth at, PSA HQ. And I said the other day, was this, them accidentally saying the quiet part out loud and getting caught up in the emotion? Maybe, maybe not, but at least they disclosed it. So whoever, goes ahead and buys this card now will know that Kurt's Card Care has been, tampered with in some capacity. Maybe tampered is a spicy choice of words, but, they wouldn't give the guy a shout out if they didn't use his services, right? And I find that piece absurd as well. Whilst PSA can look at this card and not see that anything was done to it, I don't know how them as a business could be sitting there comfortably having somebody, do this to a card of this magnitude and say that in their office. Yes, they didn't say they used Kurt's Card Care, but they gave the guy a shout out. How can you, as a company that is all about, authentication services and wanting to maintain this pristine level of integrity within the industry, right? Because they're seen as the best when it comes to grading, right? Pete's SGC's CEO, Pete, came out and said the same thing, right? Collectors is world leading when it comes to this stuff, global leading brand. PSA is clearly the reason why that is the case. So you're sort of sitting there with all this integrity, all this, bravado with you as a business and want to have the shoulder pinned out and the chest popped out to say that I'm such a top dog, yet you're sort of not doing anything about this one card. You're letting somebody come into your office and say they use this, and then on the other hand, at the side of your mouth say, well, we don't condone this behavior. It's like, well, if your word meant something, if your integrity meant something, surely you could go beyond and say, okay, we can't see that anything was done to this card, but why did you guys have to say that in the room? I think we're going to have to decertify your card because we now have trust issues when it comes to your card. That's where my mum would go. That's what I would think a business of this kind of integrity would do. But, that's not going to happen, right? Because clearly they don't have a problem with this, which is quite surprising for me that they've come out and reaffirmed the fact that this is considered altered. This was a line in the sand moment for PSA that I think they completely dropped the ball on. They had an opportunity here to say, well, we can't spot this kind of stuff, so you can polish your cards, that's perfectly fine. But, trimming and color touch-ups, that's still considered altering. They had an opportunity here, like I said the other day, draw that line in the sand and actually maybe even offer polishing as a service. But they didn't do that. They wanted to keep both sides of the fence happy. They wanted to sit on that fence and say, altering is bad, but we didn't see anything wrong with this card, even though the people said they used the service in our head office. Or they shouted at the guy. Maybe they didn't say they used the service, but they shouted at the guy. So you guys can sort of see the irony and the hypocrisy of what just went down there. I think that's one of those things. Again, I'll say it. If you want to use this, go for gold. Just disclose it to me that you used it. Don't hide the serial numbers and try and shy away from the whole situation. Now, I will say this. I've talked to Kurt in the past a long time ago. If he wants to come on the channel and do a live stream and sort of talk through this, I'm more than happy to do it because I would like to get some insight from him on why he's so comfortable this stuff does not damage the car long term. Because again, maybe I'm just an old man yelling at clouds, but for the time being, the graders consider this altered. And my one concern is there going to be long-term damage from using this sort of stuff? After you put a polish on a card and maybe it gets wiped off, but maybe there's some, transparent substance that remains on the card and does damage long-term. Maybe I'm wrong for thinking like that, but I would like the answer to that question before we all of a sudden allow people to be doing this kind of stuff. People can do whatever they want, right? I'm not trying to be your mum or your dad, but you guys get where I'm thinking, right? I want to have that answer. I want to have that question answers, I should say. Sorry if I'm stumbling and mumbling. I'm not feeling the best. You could probably tell in my voice, but that's sort of where I want, things to go. We can all praise Kurt's Card Care and all that kind of thing, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon right now saying how amazing it is. But they're completely missing the point that PSA has come out and said this stuff is still considered altered. This is altering your card. You're adding a substance to it. So why the heck are you all jumping up and down for? They're still saying it's altered. So I don't know, guys. Hopefully this is the last time we can talk about it for a while. But like I sort of alluded to, if Kurt wants to come on and have a chat, we can. I'm more than happy to bring him on. I'm pretty fair and balanced, as I've always been. There's just a lot of questions I'm going to ask him, particularly around, how do you know this doesn't damage the card long term? Do you have any, long term cards that you've soaked that still look the same as the day you soaked them? All that kind of stuff. Has the edge rolling reverted over time? Have any of these, scratches resurfaced? Does humidity do anything to the card long term once you've done this sort of stuff as well? If he's all in the mindset of wanting to make this more mainstream and prove to graders that this is not the same as trimming or not the same as adding color and all that sort of stuff, then he needs to come out and at least have a discussion on that. And maybe he doesn't need to, maybe he thinks he doesn't need to, but there are plenty of collectors that think the same way as me and maybe would come more around to the whole situation if we could get some of those concerns alleviated, like I said. Because my biggest thing has always been making sure that somebody doesn't buy something and then 6 months later or 5 years later, something happens to the card where it maybe reverts. Maybe the polish does something to it and it eats away at the card, or cracking starts to happen post-soaking like we've read about and like I referenced earlier on the Blowout forums. But, that's where my mindset is. So maybe you guys are against me. Maybe you still think I'm an idiot. But like I've said from day one, and like, I said the other day and people in the comments didn't believe me, PSA consider these altered. That needs to be remembered. So when you're praising these guys, just keep that front of mind. You can agree with, PSA's inability or not to spot it. That's a completely different topic. But for the time being, they consider it altered, and they probably do that for a reason. So, let's chat in the comments below. I really appreciate everyone. Apologies again for my voice, but I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.